Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, dear friends, I'm pleased to welcome you here to the Nordic Council of Ministers and to the launch of this State of the Nordic Region report from one of our flagship institutions under the auspices of the Nordic Council of Ministers, Nordic. I think it's a report that contains a unique collection of data, of maps, on the economy, on migration, on employment, education, energy, accessibility, you name it, in our region. This highly topical report also gives a comprehensive status of the latest developments in the region, which I think overall is positive, especially in a European perspective, but there are also some challenges I will come back to. For example, the report tells us that the Nordic countries are performing well on indicators relating to labor force participation and education when compared to the EU as a whole. The Nordics enjoy higher rates of employment and lower rates of unemployment, as well as high rates on school completion. Also, I found the information on recent demographic changes in the Nordic region highly interesting. The report states that urban populations are increasing at a disproportionate rate. As much as 97% of the population growth has taken place in the 30 largest urban areas. And I think we'll hear more during the day of this perspective, also related to what is happening in a global context. Furthermore, there is a clear picture that immigration accounts for the largest portion of the population increase in the Nordic region. Of course, no surprise to any of us, but still the facts are there. So the question is, and it's stated in the report, whether the demographic changes pose an opportunity or a challenge to the Nordic region. And of course the answer is yes, both. If you want to see more about my reflections around the answer, a bit deeper than just that brief answer, you can read my blog on the Northern website, where I will deliberate a bit on that question. With regards to this, I would like to mention that the Nordic Council of Ministers last week decided to initiate a program on how we can learn from each other on best practice of integration of immigrants. That's a huge issue, of course, in the region right now. And I'm happy to say the governments have decided to cooperate on how to do the integration as best as possible. Learn from each other and learn from other countries outside of the region. I'll not say more about the report itself, but leave this to the many experts that are present. I'd like to extend a special welcome to Mr. Alistair Ross. I had the privilege of, or the joy of listening to you on television here in Denmark last night, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your perspective. Mr. Ross is from the Economist Intelligence Unit. Sounds very strong, so that's very promising. And you will share and discuss the future of Nordic cities and remote regions and in relation to Europe and beyond. Having this event with the Nordic, which I said is an important institution in our Nordic family, I will also reflect just briefly upon the fact that we're in the reform process in the Nordic Council of Ministers, where we are mandated to modernize Nordic cooperation to achieve an even more dynamic and political cooperation. This is an organization of the governments, it's an organization of ministerial cooperation, it's an organization of politics. That means that what we are reforming is everything from the way we work, our operations, to enhance dynamic political agenda, but also the basis of politics, which of course are the facts. I at least strongly would advocate that politics needs to be knowledge-based. I'm tempted to tell you story, a personal story, related to what was said about the spatial research, because it's said that John F. Kennedy, when he launched the policy of a man on the moon, by the end of this decade, he didn't ask his research institutes and experts. They came afterwards and asked him, do you want to know what it takes? And he said, yes, very well, and then they made it. I didn't intend to compare myself to John F. Kennedy, but I was in a similar situation back a few years ago when I was Minister of Health of Norway, and a journalist called me and asked me what I would do with the increasing smoking rates among adolescents. And I said, reduce them. And I said, how much? And I said, substantially. And the journalist went on, of course, like journalists do, like they did with you last night. He said, how much is substantially? And I said, we should be able to halve it. And then, of course, he got really excited. So he said, how soon? And I said, in a few years. And he said, how many years? And I said, 5 years. And then the headlines next day, you know, the whole, across Aftenposten, whole front page, Minister of Health promises to halve the number of adolescent smokers in 5 years. And so the experts came to me and asked me, do you want to know what this takes? And I said, yes, very well. And in 2 months I got the report. Knowledge-based recommendations, 5 recommendations, and they were quite rough, you know. But we did it. We implemented all the 5 recommendations. And in 5 years I called the journalist back and I said, do you know, we made it. We halved the number of adolescent smokers in 5 years by working knowledge-based. So that for the inspiration of knowledge-based politics, and that's why we take pride in our institution, like Nordic, who works to enhance and develop our knowledge base. And that's why we in the Nordic Reform now work to make better use of all the knowledge that we produce. The statistics, the indicators. We have statistical committees on health and social statistics and media statistics with Nordicom. Nordforsk has a new initiative on register-based research, and of course Norregio being a research institute on regional development and urban planning. So in the reality, Nordic Council of Ministers has been working with statistics for a long time. Since 1962 we have published a Nordic Statistical Yearbook, and even though the actual book nowadays is replaced by a digital solution, of course, statistics are still gathered in the Nordic Statistical Database, and the indicators are identified that tell us something about the Nordics and the Nordic cooperation. So beginning in this year, the Nordic Council of Ministers will therefore put forward an emphasis on providing decision makers with comprehensive and clear statistical basis and analysis. And this will be done by gathering, reviewing and maintaining current Nordic statistics. It's an extensive but very important task that I look forward to realize. Norregio's work as a Nordic Research Institute, and more specifically the report State of the Nordic Region 2016, is an excellent example of analytical knowledge that can be used in Nordic policy-making processes. Statistics is an important aspect that can contribute to furthering the development of Nordic cooperation. So, as a final point, I'd like to remind you all that evidence-based approach to public policy is not a novel concept. I've heard and read that it's traceable back to the 14th century, and even so, knowledge continues to be a vital part of decision making, and therefore we will aim at increasing the usage of statistics in our analysis with the Nordic Council of Ministers in the years to come. So before I give the floor to the next speaker, I just want to congratulate Norregio on this report and wish you all a fruitful discussion here today. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you very much, Dagfinn. So our next speaker is Mr. Kjell Nilsson, who is the director of Norregio, and he will soon be accompanied by Julien Grunfelder, who is also one of the co-editors of the report, and we could also say at this stage that this report has been a massive teamwork, very fruitful collaboration within Norregio. A lot of our researchers have contributed, and that's also kind of visible when you see the width of the report and the many different themes that are included. But Kjell, please.
Okay.
The
Thank
floor is
you,
yours.
Åsa. First, I should get rid of this one to find my presentation. To start where Åsa ended now, the report is a genuine result of teamwork of researchers, communication team, and GIS and data experts at Nordregio. And I also, in that sense, want to say thank you to Nordic Energy Research, which has helped us with the chapter on energy. Dagfinn told a story, so I intend to tell a story as well. It was a British professor, an expert in a very, very complicated topic. Then he retired, and he made tours around in the countryside and gave lectures for people in the evenings. And as a distinguished English professor, he of course had his own driver. And then after a while, they were in the Scottish Highlands on a tournée, and on the way to the place, he got an idea. He suggested to the driver got an idea. He said that, I've listened to you so many times now that I can give your lecture as well as you do. Okay? So they changed clothes. And the professor took on the driver's uniform, and the driver took on the professor's suit. And the presentation, the lecture went perfectly well, of course. But then, during the presentation, it showed that one of the professor's strongest antagonists, enemies in the old academic days, were in the audience. And of course, when the lecture was over and time for questions, he asked a very complicated question that he of course knew. He knew, of course, that what they have done, and he was sure that the driver couldn't answer that question. And then the driver, alias a professor, he then thought a while, and then he said, to such a stupid question, I do not humiliate myself to answer. I handed it over to my driver, standing in the back of the room. So the drivers behind State of the Nordic region are many staff members, but especially I want to stress that the spiders in the web in this job has been Julian Grünfelder, who will present afterwards some of the results here, Linus Rispling and Gustav Norlén, who are the GIS team at Norregio. Yes. Okay, the report has 5 different themes: demographic changes, labor force, economy, infrastructure, and then it comes to the exciting thing, measuring regional potential. You know that both Stockholm and Copenhagen, they are competing of calling themselves the capital of Scandinavia or the capital of the Nordic. Let's see how it is with that. The Nordic countries are doing well. It has been stressed many times, and Dagfinn also mentioned this, that the demographic changes in the Nordic region are both opportunities and challenges. Our population is now 26.5 million people, and which is an increase by 2.7 million. It is above 40% above the European average. We can see that Iceland and Norway are the countries that have increased their population with 1% per year. Sweden is at the Nordic average, Denmark and Finland at EU average, Faroe Island and Greenland has a stable population. But as has been mentioned, there are challenges behind that. And the first challenge is the territorial unbalance. Because as you see here, the 30 so-called the largest functional urban areas. That means the municipalities and the surroundings that are, according to OECD, defined as a functional region. 97%, over 97% has been absorbed in these areas. So that's the first challenge, demographic challenge. The second one is about the immigration. Net immigration accounted for 2/3 of the total Nordic population increase over the past 25 years. And we all know about the situation today and the struggle to handle this situation. The third challenge is our age structure. And here it's measured as old age dependency. Old age dependency means the ratio of the proportion of the population which is outside the normal working age, and in this case is over 65. And which in a way are depending on economic activity and tax paying from the working population. And it's no news, of course, that the old age dependency rates are rising across the whole Nordic region, as in the rest of the Western world. But as you can see here, it is particularly high in remote rural municipalities as younger people move to urban and urban adjacent municipalities for studies and for jobs. However, since 2010, old age dependency rates in more accessible rural areas, more accessible to urban areas, has outstripped those of the more remote rural municipalities. And the reason for this is that older people, they want to have the services, they want to have health care in reasonable distances. So we also see a trend there. And then another very important trend in the old age dependency, and that is that all the consequences of domestic migration is that men outnumber women everywhere but in the bigger urban areas. Because women take more advanced education and they tend to move earlier, so to say, than men. The employment situation, EU 2020 has the target 75% employment. In the Nordic region, we are on a good way to reach that level. We have today or in 2014 we had 73.4% of the population that were in the workforce, which is about 8% more or 9% more than the EU average. As you all know, Iceland experienced a very hard years during the economic crisis, and they have made a remarkable recovery for that, and now are amongst the highest, strongest performers with an employment rate that is well above the Nordic average. So it seems like islands are doing specifically well, actually, because Faroe Islands has over 90%, I think, and employed amongst the 15 to 65-year-olds. And on the other hand, we also see Åland as sticking out when it comes to an otherwise quite problematic situation in Finland with quite high unemployment, and therefore you see the lighter colors here, the light green that covers most parts of Finland. When it comes to Copenhagen, the municipalities around Copenhagen has employment rates of 80% and above this, while Odense, Langeland, Svendborg and Nyborg in Syddenmark are among the municipalities with the lowest employment in Denmark. During recent years, it has been quite a lot of focus on youth unemployment as a consequence of the economic crisis. We have the risk of a generation where many of the young people never succeed in entering the labor market, so to say. And you can see here that especially Sweden has high unemployment amongst the young people, while Norway and Iceland has strikingly low unemployment amongst the youngsters. In Denmark, the highest youth unemployment can be discovered in the capital region, especially in some of the suburbs of Copenhagen. And in the worst situation, once again, when it comes to employment, is in Finland, where you have areas where it's almost up to 45% of the youth that are not in work, and that you can imagine easily the consequences of such a situation. Another target in the EU 2020 strategy is that 40% of the 30 to 34-year-olds should have a tertiary education, a higher education. And there you can see that actually, if you look at country level, all Nordic countries have reached that level today. What is strikingly for the Nordic region here is that women have 15% higher percentage of higher education than men. So it's remarkable in those ages, the differences here. Economic performance, we are doing well. We are amongst the wealthiest regions in Europe, especially the capital regions, but also when we look at especially Sweden and Norway, there are northern regions that are performing well over the European average. In these regions, it's often depending on large single industries which have a worldwide market, so to say. In Åland, for example, it's the transport sector. In Norrbotten in Sweden, it's the mining. And in northern Norway, oil exploitation and fisheries. Also, Greenland and Faroe Islands are above the European average when it comes to GDP per capita. Finally, the recovery from the economic crisis. You can see here how our countries have recovered after the crisis. And there, Sweden is remarkable, where you can see that all regions in Sweden have a GRP of more than, the increase of the GRP is more than 4%. Iceland and Norway is equally strong performing. Denmark, there are differences. The regions of North Jylland, Midtjylland, Syddanmark and Huvudstaden have all suffered from an average of reduced annual GRP throughout the period. And in Finland you have a similar situation in, for example, the Helsinki region and some other regions. Of course, this is the difference in GDP, so it's showing the recovery. It does not show, I mean, if the harder you were hit by the crisis and the better you recovered, then you have a blue sign here. Okay, that was my presentation. You can find the maps in PDF form that we have all the map on Norregio's homepage. I will also want also to mention the Nord map, which is an integrated tool where you can actually make your own maps with the data that is the basis for State of the Nordic region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kjell. So next in line here is Julian Grünfelder, and you will now tell us. We've already seen the ranking in the report in the final chapter there, but now we'll get a little bit more about.
Okay, thank you very much everybody for being here today. I'm Julian Grünfelder. I work at Nordregio as a GS coordinator and I'm happy to present you the ranking. And before presenting this, I would like to give you some background information about this ranking and what we aim with this ranking. And as you can see, it's called Regional Potential Index. So the focus is on the region, and as region we mean administrative regions. It's not about urban regions or that has been covered by different other existing rankings. And then potential, so we look at the picture now in the last couple of years and try to find out what are the determinants for further development into these regions. And then by index it simply means that we try to measure how those different indicators contribute to give a story on how a region can perform well now and in the next couple of years. And yeah, why a ranking at this level? You've seen many rankings. If you just Google ranking Nordic, you have tons of rankings. And if you've been to, for instance, SVT website this morning, there's been yet another article with the question, is Stockholm or Copenhagen doing better? And the answer this time was Greater Copenhagen is performing better, and that was more based on the metropolitan areas and on FDI. So it's another type of ranking, another scale, another result. And I don't know if you've already seen our result in the report, but you might see that it's neither Copenhagen or Stockholm first this time. So let's see. So what's the top 5? Yeah, you got already a big hint with the cover picture. So we got Oslo, and again, when I name those Oslo, Stockholm, etc., I talk about the administrative region, not about the city. So Oslo region is first, then you have the capital region of Denmark, then Stockholm region, then Akershus, which is the administrative region surrounding Oslo region, and then Helsinki-Uusimaa region. So it's striking that, yeah, the top 5 of these 74 administrative regions in the Nordic countries are all capital city regions, with the exception of Akershus, but since it's adjacent to Oslo region, it kind of goes into the same definition. And yeah, how did we end up getting Oslo #1? And there's a lot of data behind, and most of the data that were part of the final ranking are all to some extent incorporated in the other chapters, and mostly about demography, labor force, and economy. So we divided our index in 3 kinds of potential. The one called demography looks at, obviously the demographic structure of the region, and by that we mean mostly population density, net migration rate, demographic dependency rate, and female ratio, and those are the 4 core indicators that we thought have a great impact when it comes to regional development, and because you need a certain mass of people and of certain age, and also a gender balance in order to be attractive and to compete with other regions. And then next to that you have the labor market potential, and that obviously has some elements about employment rates, which is quite obvious. And then also another one that is quite important is the share of the age group 25-64 with high education degree. And then youth unemployment, which obviously the lower you have, then the higher you have the chance to be high in the labor market potential. And then finally we have 2 indicators for economic potential, that is GRP, the gross regional product per capita, as well as the total R&D investment. And so those are the, as you can see, 3 plus 4 plus 2 indicators behind the regional potential index. And we decided to give the same weight to each of these 3 main potentials. So in our ranking, labor potential accounts for the same as economic potential as well as demographic potential, but you have slightly small differences within each of these categories, as you can see the weights on the slide, and obviously some explanations in the report. And just maybe to go a bit closer, focusing on the top 5, since time is pretty short, so I've decided just to focus on this top 5 and looking at the actual number of points by putting all these indicators together and ranking each of the 74 administrative regions of the Nordic region. Then we get Oslo #1, as I said before, but looking at the point and the scale goes up to 900, I believe. Then you see there's only 2-point difference between #1 and #2, and then Stockholm is right behind. So I was also thinking to maybe make this presentation without putting the actual rank for the top 3, since they're so close. And then behind you have Akershus and Helsinki, which is not far either. And then also, thanks to our database that traces back harmonized data back to 1990, we could do the same ranking with 2010 data. As it has been mentioned, it's the first time we published this ranking, but we decided to see how was the situation 5 years ago. So we used the same data, just 5 years back in time. And then the number between parentheses is the rank that was 5 years ago. So you can see that the same candidates were there in the top 5 only 5 years ago, with in a slightly different order. And then looking at the points, you can see how they evolve over time. And so Copenhagen, a city, the capital region of Denmark, used to be #1, but you can see how it has shrunk, and this is mostly due to its labor market potential that has been decreasing a lot, especially in the Nordic context. And then while some other, like Akershus, this one has increased over time, so it's getting stronger, and this chance, even though the economy might get worse in the future, they still quite good preconditions to be still high in the future. And then, yeah, just to mention another part of the ranking, which is illustrated on the map, because one of the things you could see in the top 5, it's obvious that you have capital city regions there, but then looking a bit lower in the ranking, you can see, for instance, there's Skåne in the top 20, as well as Åland, which is this administrative region between Sweden and Finland. And you might believe that Skåne is performing better in the ranking, but actually Åland is way stronger. It's ranked number 11, while Skåne is 19. And this is partially due to way better labor market, where unemployment is not a big issue there in the context of Åland, and even the demographic weight is not as important as in Skåne. They still have other competitive advantages, and just looking in detail in the ranking, you can find the small things that goes a bit off what one can expect from the ranking. And again, looking back at 2010 data, you can identify some climbers and other regions that have dropped, and the climbing regions are mostly in Norway and Sweden, and that is mostly due to better economic context, as well as for the Norwegian regions, and better labor market context for the Swedish ones. And about the drops, you can see very different sort of region, one being Sjælland in Denmark and other in Finland. And they also, like, if you want to generalize, you have on one side you have, was it Norway? I'm just gonna check to be sure. Yeah, Norway and Denmark on one side, where the labor market has been weakened throughout the last couple of years, and Finland and Sweden, where the economic potential has been dropping for those regions at least. And also, if you have a greater look at the ranking, you will find out that most of the Finnish regions are part of the last ranks, and this can be linked to, for instance, if you have read The Economist last week about the article on Finland and the permafrost, how Finland is kind of trying to fight that, and also this article compare Finland and Sweden, how Sweden could get better, and Finland is kind of stuck for different purposes. But we'll continue here, but you're more than welcome to ask me any question, and if you want any data, any maps, you are welcome to write to Nordic, and we'll be happy to provide you those maps. Yeah. Thank you.